You're watching News at Prime. Let's get into this conversation now. President Cyril Ramaphosa's government says it's not ready to send envoys to America because liaison officials between South Africa and the Donald Trump administration have yet to be set up. Ramaphosa has committed to send officials to the continent and nations around the world to explain South Africa's position on a number of foreign policy matters ahead of the G20 Leaders Summit later this year. Let's try understand now the implications of the actions, in particular of AfriForum and Solidarity, from a national security standpoint. Joining us for this conversation is Dr Sydney Mufamadi, the National Security Advisor to President Ramaphosa. Dr Mufamadi, good evening to you and thank you very much for your time. When people hear the word the National Security Advisor to the President, they may be tempted to think of the criminal justice system of our country. What do you advise the President on? Can we start there?
Well, I advise the President precisely on matters of national security. National security relates to the health status of the project of creating and building democracy in our country, attending to issues of nation building, but also our national security has a perimeter which goes beyond the borders of our country. You need an integrated and united continent, a continent which is part of a world that is seen to be getting better and better. So you can see what national security means.
Understood. Let's then talk about South Africa's democratization and nation-building project. Is it at risk owing to the actions of AfriForum and Solidarity's constant visits to Washington?
Sure, it depends on what they are going to do in Washington. What clearly they are not going to do in Washington is shopping. They are going to Washington to gossip about their own country in a manner that makes the majority of our people feel betrayed. That is clearly divisive. And for a country of our history, it threatens to resuscitate the hostilities of the past.
Yeah.
And if this is not stopped, you can imagine what then happens to the nation building and democracy building project. That project gets derailed.
You speak about hostilities of the past. Recently, the President, and it was during the Foreign Ministers' G20 meeting here in Johannesburg, on the sidelines of that, he warned that race relations among citizens of South Africa could be affected by the actions of these lobby groups. Why do you think it was important for him to mention exactly what you are warning about, the hostilities of the past?
Yeah, perhaps we need to elaborate a little bit about why this is worrying. You will recall that during the transitional period, the period between the negotiations about a new South Africa and the first democratic elections, there was a fringe group, primarily Afrikaner, which was making a lot of noise, threatening to torpedo the movement towards a new South Africa. That group was so noisy that Mr. de Klerk even became reticent about moving forward with the process of negotiations, and he decided, therefore, to call for a whites-only referendum because this group was saying he does not have a mandate to interact with everybody else. So they wanted to veto the movement to a new South Africa. A whites-only referendum was held, and the majority of the whites expressed themselves in favor of allowing the process to move forward. So they were trying, this group, the AWB and the Conservative Party, to veto the will of the majority, because it was known that the majority of the people of South Africa were looking forward to a new society.
You mentioned some of the groupings at that time, AWB being one of them, but interestingly, you also invoke the Conservative Party. Some of the members of these groupings, AfriForum/Solidarity, the understanding is that their roots stem from the Conservative Party. Here's where I'm going with this. Over time, a view from many citizens of our country has been formed that the compromises of the 1994 settlement are observed by those who were on the receiving end of apartheid, whilst those who are seen as having benefited, they appear to be demanding more and more. Do you agree with that assessment?
Well, I think the first point to make is that 1994 told us what the will of the people of South Africa is. Because, as I say, the majority of the whites and clearly the majority of everybody else expressed themselves in favor of a new South Africa. Now, you have these fringe groups that I'm talking about, which even after these questions had been decided, continued to make noise. The problem, therefore, is that if they don't start dialing down on that noise and they continue to overreach, the more they overreach, the more a perception will gain root that government is walking softly around them, that government is allowing them to trump the will of the majority. If that impression is allowed to gain root because of this mischief that I'm talking about, you will then have a situation in which people say government is sparing decisiveness, thereby spoiling the spoilers. We don't want that feeling to gain currency, because the consequences of that are too ghastly to contemplate.
Today, Dr. Mufamadi, Orania exists, and I'm sure I don't need to explain what Orania is. It exists in the name of preserving Afrikaner culture. But that is not enough, because the same group of people have now gone to Washington to ask the American president, Donald Trump, to put pressure on the South African government for more. Is there more to give?
Is there more to give? You know, the rest of us in South Africa, I'm talking about the rest of us vis-a-vis this fringe group, have bent over backwards to a point of allowing them even to retreat to Orania, where they went and lived on them, in themselves, on their own. We wanted them to experiment on this thing. But as I say, you can see that the more we try to give them a chance to introspect and see if this new South Africa, which they so dreaded, is actually the beast that they feared. The more we indulge them, they seem to be in a situation where their hunger grows with eating. Right from the time of the transition and after the elections, you can see that there have been repeat offenders. There has to come a time when this repeat offending and their addiction to misbehavior is cured. I think you can see that in terms of the mood of the rest of us, we still talk even about the need for national dialogue, in which they have a place at the table. But they must not think that because they've been indulged for so long, at every turn we are going to have a referendum to see where their distaste has come to. You can't run a country like that. They need to reach a stage where they either toe the line, understanding that we have here in South Africa a country which is based on the will of the majority. And as we keep saying, that majority includes the whites.
Should Orania be dismantled? Just as a quick question before I transition to a different topic.
Should Orania be dismantled? Well, you can't dismantle a territory that is part of your country. But certainly, a change of mindset is required. These people must begin to dismantle the idea of separateness out of their minds.
Let me transition then to the role of the Trump administration. If AfriForum and Solidarity have found a keen listener in the Trump administration, what does it tell us about Mr. Trump and the conventional statesman-like behavior that the world has come to expect? I'm simply saying, is he a president that the world would have come to expect, or are we experiencing something completely different here?
Well, you speak about a conventional statesman. A conventional statesman practices diplomatic statecraft in terms of how he or she ensures that their country exists peacefully alongside other countries. We respect Mr. Trump. He's a democratically elected president of the United States. He must respect his fellow leaders who are democratically elected presidents of other countries. Surely one of the things that is really international relations 101, it's a subject of that international relations 101, is that you can't use social media to communicate with your peers. We almost every day interact with diplomats who are accredited to South Africa, including American diplomats. That is a way of keeping communication between us and America alive. We also have our own diplomats accredited to other countries, including America. We have an ambassador, we have an embassy. As we speak now, our technocrats and the American technocrats are in touch with one another. They are discussing matters of trade relations. That is how diplomacy between states is conducted.
Final question to you, sir. You are a seasoned diplomat yourself.
I'm not sure about that.
Well, I seem to know that very well. The world observed just a few days ago the treatment that came the way of the Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, at the White House. If you were advising President Cyril Ramaphosa right now on whether or not to make up his mind about going to Washington, what would you say to him?
Well, I and you would not like to see our president being subjected to that kind of treatment. So I don't know what is the best way to avoid subjection of a democratically elected president to that kind of treatment. I think reticence to try and get to the Oval Office seems to be the rational attitude to take on the matter.
You use the words reticence rather.
Yes.
Should South Africa, we know the president is planning to send envoys, not only to the continent, but the rest of the world, all of this in an effort to communicate South Africa's foreign policy posture. And I'm going to single out America. Do you think that that should still happen, given what is going on? The president's spokesperson talks about the megaphone diplomacy that seems to be the order of the day for now. Do you believe that South African envoys should be sent to America at this time?
No, the point is, should South Africa keep the lines of communication with America open? That is really the question. And the answer is yes. But South Africa cannot be expected to go to any country like an errant child going to explain himself or herself to someone who does not see themselves as a peer of a democratically elected president of South Africa. That is not the sort of relationship we want, a relationship of subservience, not us.
Dr. Sydney Mufamadi, thank you very much for your time this evening. The advisor, the National Security Advisor to President Cyril Ramaphosa. Thank you for your time. Well, still to come on News at Prime, we'll bring you more of our leading stories.